Hey there, Pauper players. This is Kendra, the Maverick Girl, here to do a quick little deck tech on Elves from the list that I played in the Pauper Challenge on October 2nd, this past Sunday. Just kind of going over the list that I used in the event and just talking about my deck choices, why I did that, as well as everything else. Now, the first thing I want to say about this list is I went a little more conservative with my list. I don't know if anybody's been kind of seeing some of the things I've been doing, any of my lists that have maybe been popping up on MCG Goldfish, or that I've talked about in, say, the Discord or something. But I have been trying a lot of off-color things. I've been playing Essence Wardens in the deck. I've been playing Electrickeries in the sideboard, dropping this lovely little Scattershot Archer in favor of something more along the lines of Aerial Volley. And I'm going to kind of get into why I'm doing that and why I'm choosing this list instead. The first thing I need to get out of the way in that regard is that there's actually pretty much two different metas. Obviously, everybody looks at the MTG Goldfish and assumes, okay, here's the meta, this is what it looks like, and so on. But in actuality, it's not really quite the full depiction of things. Because obviously you're going to see things in leagues more than you are going to see them in a challenge, for example. Burn. Everybody freaking plays Burn. It's probably arguably one of the easiest decks to play in the format, in the game even, for that matter. Maybe a little difficult to master, but definitely a fairly easy deck to play, and it's also very cheap. It's affordable. So what happens? A lot of people play it. And it's been getting a lot more play now lately, even especially because of the addition of, I believe, Firebrand Archer. I can't remember the name 100% off the top of my head. I think that's it, though. But when you comes to like challenges and everything, you really don't see as many of them. So I kind of took a peek at what has been seeing a lot of play in the last couple weeks for challenges before I actually went in and played it. And what I came to find was there was a lot of Stompy. I was seeing a pretty good amount of Is It Blitz. Boros was definitely making a decent showing, as well as, oh, what was the other list? It's right on the tip of my tongue. Delver. There you go. And what's funny is you were actually seeing a little bit less of the Blue-Red Delver, the Is It Delver, in the last couple weeks. Instead, you were actually seeing a decent amount of Mono Blue Delver. And that kind of led to some of my choices, too. So, with that having been said, let's kind of just dive into what Elves is, how it functions in its current state. I've discussed this at length before, but I think there is a future with Lead the Stampede. So, first and foremost, you have your, well, there's the land count. 13 lands. Now, usually I see between 12 and 14 lands. Very rarely you also see sometimes the 8 lands and 4 land grants. I don't like that. I think the land grants give your opponent too much information, and while I've heard the argument that Elves doesn't care because Elves is just spitting out its hand anyway, it does affect, like, how your opponent sequences things. You can't, like, let's say I had one game where I played, not in this challenge, but in an offline match with some friends and everything, and I had a friend that I was playing against in this event who wasn't very familiar with the list. And so I was able to bluff out a Timberwatch Elf, and then when they ended up countering it, and they had no more mana to counter my Distant Melody when I cast that, which was clearly the more important card to counter. Now, as a result of that, if you were to play Land Grant, it lets your opponent know that, hey, you have Timberwatch Elf and Distant Melody, and they're going to play around that accordingly. They're not going to counter your Timberwatch necessarily, depending on the board state, of course. But they're going they'll hold that counter for the Distant Melody. So I don't like it, but I think 13 has been a sweet spot. 12 Forest, 1 Island. Reason for the island is this little card right here, Sylvan Ranger. I guess I'll just cover that right now, just rather than just going clean cut right across. But the Sylvan Ranger literally exists in this deck to get out the island, and once you have the island, then it's just deck thinning. Less cards that you need to go through for a Distant Melody, or less chances that you're going to draw one of those lands. I've definitely had plenty of games where I end up flooding out against a deck because I'm just drawing too many lands. It's not good when you have 13 lands in your deck and you draw 6 of them. So next I'm going to go to the other, kind of bread and butter of the deck, is the Mana Dorks. It doesn't really matter how you do this, it's the wise option to split them up. I forget exactly the reason why. I just kind of went along with, seeing that other players were doing this. I believe the reason is, Echoing Decay, and, obviously, Echoing Truth. Since they have different names, it's harder to kill them all that way. Or bounce them, I suppose. I'm sure there's other cards that do that same thing, cards that have the same name, sort of thing. So, you definitely just want to do that for that, but you ultimately, usually, the lists run about 7. So, I just have a nostalgic preference for Landlord Elves. Obviously, I'm using, the older arts for a lot of these. So, that's what I do. I usually use more of those, but I do 2 Mystic, 2 Finehorn Elves, and 2 Landlord Elves. And these are one of the main reasons you're really able to get away with 13 lands, even though this deck, tops out its curve at 4, and you're going to be casting a lot of 4-drops. It really functions because of these guys. It also functions because of your other Mana Dorks, but really, a lot of games you are crucially dependent on Forest Mana Dork, because you really, really need to hit that second mana source to be able to be casting your Priest of Titania, your Well-Wisher, your Elvish Vanguard, and so on. So I'll let that lead into my next one, Birchlore Rangers. This card is really one of the clinch cards. Obviously, it is your colored source for off-color cards. It's one of your blue sources for Distant Melody. It's one of your colors for your sideboard options, if you choose to have any. Some decks I know some of the more popular off-color options are obviously, like I'm playing right here, Mob Justice, or Flaring Pain, or Hydroblast are typically the ones I see. Lumith Redfield, I believe it is another one of those options as a white source, but really, if you're kind of playing in leagues and everything, I understand budget and whatnot, but you should really throw a couple dollars and just get the Spider Silk Armors. Anyway, basically, what it lets you do is it lets you tap 2 untapped Elves and make mana. Where's that good with? Well, it's good with Nettle Sentinel, which first off, you would attack with Nettle Sentinel, cast Birchlore Rangers, it untaps, then you tap both of them down, cast a Mana Dork like Elvish Mystic or something, untaps, tap them down again, play down a Kieran Ranger, and just untap and just keep going, and you just churn out dudes. It gets even better when you have Huntmaster on the field and are spitting out tokens. Now, I've heard people say that the Morph ability is never relevant. That's a lie. It's actually really good, and it's really useful in a lot of certain circumstances. You'll actually see in one of my match replays later on that it actually became extremely relevant versus Prismatic Strands. My opponent had Prismatic Strands in the graveyard, as well as probably more in their deck, maybe in their hand, and I ended up casting 3 of these guys face down. with Timberwatch Elves and like a whole field of creatures. So it definitely becomes relevant. It's just you have to know when it becomes relevant. One of the other moments where it becomes relevant, obviously if you're facing Electrickeries, it's a good way to be able to lay down your Birchler Rangers and not get killed by an Electrickery. Also, it gets better with Spider Silk Armor because it gives you that extra bit of power and toughness to be able to deal with, like, say, a Delver or something like that. So, I also kind of just covered Nettle Sentinel in the process here. I'll get to the Longbow. I just think I should cover all the other pieces so I can kind of then explain how Longbow works with them. Kieran Ranger is both, it acts in two different ways here. First off, let's say you have a hand that you open up with, and it has Forest, Kieran Ranger, but no Birchlore Rangers, Mystic, Finehorn, or Llanowar. But then you have, like, Priest of Titania, or Sylvan Ranger. So what you want to do then is you go Forest, Kieran Ranger, and then go turn 2, oh shit, you didn't draw a land. So then you're gonna activate Kieran Ranger, maybe attack if they didn't cast, like, I don't know, like a creature or something, and have it untap itself after you tap down your land, bring the Forest back, and then play it again, and now you can cast your Vanguard, your Priest, your Ranger, or your Well-Wisher. Alternatively, it obviously then can be used to untap one of your mana dorks. It can be used to untap Well-Wisher. It can be used to untap Timberwatch Elf. And it just has so many uses that it really just is one of, like, those linchpin cards in your deck. Elvish Vanguard is just, it's a big beat stick. It gets big fast. That's really all about I can say with it. One thing you've got to watch with cards like this, Priest of Titania, Well-Wisher, and Timberwatch Elf too, is it does activate off of all of your opponent's elves too. If your opponent is on Stompy or Boggles, and they cast Kieran Ranger, Nettle Sentinel, Glade Cover Scout, or Silhana Ledgewalker, it will trigger Elvish Vanguard. So it does get bigger off of that, and that's something to consider. I ran 4 of them because I think I was expecting more of an aggressive meta. Same with, like, Nettle Sentinel. Normally, I typically run 2 Nettle Sentinels and 3 Vanguards. But I think the more aggressive-oriented meta kind of felt like it would be a bit better with more of them. Then we got Priest of Titania, which is tap, add mana for each elf on the field, which is massive. It's the card that really lets Distant Melody get where Distant Melody needs to go, because it just generates so much mana. Because usually what you're going to do is you're going to tap down Priest of Titania and whatever blue source you have, draw usually 7+ cards, and then you're just going to spew out a bunch of creatures, and probably somewhere in that mix you have a Kieran Ranger, and you activate Kieran Ranger, untapping the Priest of Titania, and oh hell, you have way too much mana at your disposal now, and hopefully then you can cast another Distant Melody and keep the chain going. So obviously I've already talked about Sylvan Ranger. Well-Wisher, self-explanatory. Taps, gain a life for each elf on the battlefield. Normally straight life gain is not good, but when it's straight life gain to this extreme, it helps so much. It's so much that it lets you get ahead, lets you stabilize, and lets you be able to combo off, get where you need to. It lets you deal with the aggressive decks. It lets you deal with burn if you can keep this on the field, which, honestly, you usually can't. However, it does draw the ire of burn away from your face directly. But it stops out like Stompy, helps you stay in there against Affinity, other decks like that. And even decks where you wouldn't think, that life gain is huge. For example, Dinrovatron. You can make it so that you gain so much life that even if they bounce away your entire board, they cannot beat you, because they will deck out before they can deal any nearly enough damage to kill you. Timberwatch Elf, same kind of deal. It's pretty self-explanatory. You tap it, creature gets +X/+X, where X is the number of elves on the field. Where this card is really good, again, it's with Ranger, Kyrian Ranger. So you can start to see how all of these cards really interact with each other. They play off of one another, and they're really interactive with one another. So then you have Huntmaster, which is every time you cast an elf spell, you create a creature token. And the token, obviously, it's not really big, it's not anything fancy. But imagine having 4 of these guys out and drawing 7 or 8 cards. You cast an Elf Sentinel and go, oh, hey, I have 4 dudes, they all pump my Vanguard. Now I cast Birchlore Rangers, untap my Elf Sentinel, make 4 more dudes, and now I can keep tapping them all for more mana to keep the chain going. And each time you cast an elf spell off of that chain, you're creating that many more tokens. And then before you know it, you've got 100 creatures, 100+ creatures on your board. I've actually done the math on how possible, like what the maximum amount is, assuming that you went Huntmaster, 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 and then played out every elf in your deck, but I forget the exact amount off the top of my head. Either way, it's kind of irrelevant. The other thing, too, you gotta know when you're doing this, and you gotta be paying attention to the board. You'll find in one of my matches, I believe the same one I mentioned, the Birchlore Rangers, where I won with the Birchlore Rangers by morphing them. It actually could have been won by Mob Justice. But the problem was, I forgot about, and this is kind of a giveaway to which match this is, but there was like some Soul Wardens and stuff like that, and I forgot about those. And because I didn't kill them, they gained way too much life from my tokens and such, for me to be able to kill them with Mob Justice. So I had to go the alternative route of morphing my Birchlore Rangers. So then, on top of all that, then you have Distant Melody, which is choose a creature type and draw a card for each permanent of that type. Hey, you have 20 elves. Cast Distant Melody. You draw 20 cards. Now, one thing you want to be really careful of when you're casting Distant Melody is how many cards you have in your deck. Now, there's going to be a lot of times where you, let's say you have 20 cards left in your deck, but you have 25 elves on the board. So that's when you start looking at the other types in the on the board. How many warriors have you created with Huntmaster? Obviously you have Huntmaster itself as a warrior, Vanguard is a warrior, Nettle Sentinel is a warrior. The other option is Druid, Birchlore Rangers, your Mystics, Finehorn Elves, Lower Elves, and Priest Titania, they are all Druids. Some of these cards that you would think would have another subtype, like Well-Wisher or Timberwatch Elf, that clearly look like a Druid or a Shaman and a Warrior, they don't have any of those secondary types. But either way, you can still play off of those. And the very worst case, let's say you just only have a few cards left in your deck, okay, that's when you Howl Scout and just get those last couple cards that you need. So now I've kind of like gone over this, let me explain Longbow a little bit. First off, I think Longbow is really, really, really good right now, and has actually saved my ass in matchups where it shouldn't have mattered. I've had it win me games like single-handedly against Affinity, because it's just able to shoot down their dudes if I have a strong enough of a board presence. The other thing you can do with it is you cast Nettle Sentinel first, wait a turn, and then combo off. You attach Longbow to it, and then every single time you cast an elf after you've like drawn your entire deck. You untap it, you ping your opponent. You untap it, you ping your opponent. You untap it, you ping your opponent. And that becomes relevant in a lot of matchups, not even just obviously as a combo finisher, but what it also lets you do it against is like an alternate win condition to Dinrovatron, or other Tron lists that run fogs, but usually it's Dinrovatron that you're doing it against. Reason for that is, like, Moment's Peace is prevent all combat damage. However, Nettle Sentinel tapping for Longbow, or any of your dudes tapping for Longbow, actually is not combat damage, so you just ping them out. It does not get around Prismatic Strands, but again, that's where you can use like Birchler Rangers and morph it. Where it's really good though is obviously it's a mirror breaker, and especially in the main deck. It can beat down Stompy, it beats down Delver because you just shoot down all of the fairies. Hey, that's a great spell stutter sprite you guys just played, but I'm gonna kill it. And that does it for the main deck. So let me talk about my sideboard a little bit. This is very similar to what I've been playing in my sideboards lately. I have been playing, still been playing the 3 Gleeful Sabotage, still been playing 2 Moment's Peace, 1 Rapid Vigor, 2 Luminescent Rain, 2 Spider Silks, and normally I've been playing 2 Relic of Progenitus. Now, what am I doing instead here? A lot of times I've actually been playing, like I said, 2 Spider Silks, but I've been running 1 in the main deck. But right now, I wasn't expecting to see like any Electrickeries or anything like that really in the main deck for matchups. So it made me a little more hesitant to actually bother with it. But I think it's still a very essential part of what it does. So I definitely wanted to keep it. What I was also running before was 2 Electrickeries as a cute little sideboard thing, and an Aerial Volley as ways to deal with either, like, again, Electrickery could deal with the mirror match, or it could deal with Delver options, but thing with that, you have to hit Birchler Rangers. You have to hit Birchler Rangers. Cannot emphasize that enough. You have to freaking hit Birchler Rangers. So, it's just a cute trick. Nobody expects it, so it's kind of cool, it's kind of fun, but it's not my main thing. Aerial Volley, I think, is the right choice, because it pops off certain flying targets, and unlike, say, Scattershot Archer, without a Kieran Ranger or multiples, it hits things like Core Skyfisher, which is a 2/3 flyer, or Glint Hawk, or things like that. And I've also been running Flaring Pain as opposed to Mob Justice, but I think Mob Justice kind of effectively does the same thing, but can help more in different scenarios. And I think it's just more of a preference option. I just hadn't tried Mob Justice actually before this event, which is kind of funny. So let me just kind of go into it, just like straight across the board. Mob Justice. Holy hell. So, okay. Moment's Peace and Prismatic Strands and cards like that have just been seeing so much play lately. So I actually started running a 1 of Flaring Pain in the list. Obviously, if you're going Distant Melody, you are going to hit it, so you really don't need more than 1. Flaring Pain is probably better against the Tron lists, because in the event that they counter it, now granted, if you've already cast Distant Melody, they probably would be, not have the counters in the first place. But let's say they did have the counter for like your Flaring Pain, or for your Mob Justice. With the Flaring Pain, you could always just recast it, so it wouldn't matter in the first place. But I still think Mob Justice is good even through that, despite that, because again, like I said, if you're comboing off, then they should have countered something at that point. And also it gets through Prismatic Strands, And even if you're not trying to get through prismatic strands, okay, let's say you're able to get in there, your opponent's at 10 life, and you're able to deal 5 damage to them, but you still have like 6 or 7 elves. Mob Justice just lets you kind of like guarantee that you get that last bit of damage through before they untap and come back at you with crackback or something like that. That's kind of what I think. Now, what I will say about this card is I actually didn't use it nearly as much as I kind of hoped to in the challenge. But I will say, when it's good, it's really freaking good. So it's definitely worth playing in the list, I think. Next up is my Scattershot Archers. Now, if you read my whole write-up on Lead the Stampede, I have some actually very mixed feelings about this card right now. I think in leagues, you're seeing so much like Is It Delver? You are seeing a lot of Boros. And honestly, a lot of times that's the kind of matchup where you want to bring Scattershot Archer in, but in reality, the card is going to die. It's going to die so quick and so fast, it's not even going to be funny. But the thing is, people have so much memory of it because of Mono Blue Delver. When that deck was king, Scattershot Archer just won you the game if you dropped it. So, why am I running Scattershot Archer? Because I expected more Mono Blue Delver. There's actually been a pretty decent showing of it recently, so I figured alongside everything else it was a pretty good call. And you'll find it actually did help me versus a Is It Delver matchup, which is kind of funny. Gleeful Sabotage, it's just your one way to really deal with, one of your great ways to deal with enchantments, Boggles, and Circle Protection Green, primarily, as well as dealing with Affinity and other matchups. Like, you can bring it in against Kadoltha Boros and everything, and people are like, oh, yeah, you're just gonna, what, you're gonna hit their, Ichor Wellspring? No. Try hitting their Great Furnaces, or their Ancient Dens. Maybe Prophetic Prism. So it has a lot of pieces. Moment's Peace, just a great way to deal with aggro lists. Now, why do you want those when you have cards like Vanguard or Well-Wisher? Sometimes there's matchups where you feel like the deck is just going to get there faster. It's a great way to deal with Stompy, for one. Now, I don't always bring it in against Stompy, but sometimes I definitely do. I think it's a great way to deal with Stompy because sometimes you just need that one extra turn, and as it would turn out, they're going to kill you. And being able to buy yourself that 1 or 2 extra turns with Moment's Peace can just give you the game where if you didn't have it, you would have just lost. Rapid Vigor, this is anti-electrickery stuff, but what it's really doing in here is anti-swirling sandstorm. Since that card has seen a huge rise now, I still think, as far as dealing with a lot of those cards, Electrickery and Shrivel, Spider Silk Armor is 100,000% your best option. The other options would be Rapid Vigor, which regenerates each creature you control, Magnify, which is each creature gets +1/+1 on the battlefield, and that includes yours and your opponent's for 1 mana, or Lumathread Field, which is a white enchantment with Morph, and it gives all your creatures +0/+1. Now, Spider Silk Armor is pretty much that, but it gives your creatures the incentive of it reach, which is big against those decks that have the flyers, and it's also more on color, so it's easier to cast. But Rapid Vigor is good because of Swirling Sandstorm. So obviously now I've covered Spider Silk Armor as well. That's why I used to run 4 Spider Silks, but now I run 3 of those and 1 of Rapid Vigor. Because like Electrickery is arguably the worst card to deal with this deck. The #1 worst card to see is Gumbage Witches, but Spider Silk Armor still does really help with that. Next up is Luminescent Rain. I really went back and forth on what I was going to play. I really have been liking the idea of the tech that is Pulse of Marasa. I know it's not commonly played in Elves, but I think it's really good. I think it's better in like leagues where you're expecting more burn, because then you can just, oh, you played a Well Witcher, your opponent spent a burn spell on it. Now I'm going to cast Pulse of Marasa, get back my Well Witcher, and gain 6 life. Which really, if you're playing burn, that's probably about the most you could usually probably get off of Luminescent Rain. But Luminescent Rain just helps. Again, it helps like Stompy against Stompy. You can gain just a bunch of life. Helps against Is It Blitz. But where like you'll find it helped me a lot in one of my matchups, big time. Just let me get so far ahead that they just couldn't come back from it. Going back to Moment's Peace, I mentioned Is It Blitz just now. I also wanted to specify that's pretty much the #1 reason this card is in here. Moment's Peace, dealing with Is It Blitz as well as like Inside Out Combo. Inside Out Combo took the tournament the week before, and this just like stops those decks stone cold. They can't kill you on their combo turn, and you cast this after they've already pretty much like comboed out. So that way they like lose any and all like board advantage, board state, whatever they're trying to kill you. Last but not least, there's Relic Progenitus, which not only acts as a way to deal with graveyard strategies, like Tron, like if they cast their Ghostly Flicker, you can just relic away their entire yard, stuff like that. But it also is, again, anti-Swirling Sandstorm Hate, because in order for Swirling Sandstorm to deal the damage, they have to have 7 or more cards in their graveyard. If they cast Swirling Sandstorm and you pop off Relic of Progenitus, they have nothing. And then, as a result, Swirling Sandstorm does nothing. I'm sorry, it doesn't do anything. So, that's pretty much about it. Now, as far as some matchups, some really easy ones for me, personally, are Stompy, Mono Blue Delver. Blue-Red Delver is a little more dicey because of the burn spells and the tech. Now, I think the matchup for that is pretty even in Game 1, but when you get to like Game 2, Game 3 post-board, where they have Trickery and Swirling Sandstorm, it gets a lot more tricky. Tron is definitely a pretty easy matchup. Boggles, Slivers, things like these are pretty easy to get around. Boggles can still beat you just with sheer force, but like if you get Well Wishers and such down early enough, Timberwatch Elf with Kieran Ranger, then you can just beat back their hexproof dudes, no problem. And it gets even better post-board when you have Gleeful Sabotage and Moment's Peace and all that. Some of your worst matchups, though, I already mentioned Burn, but Mono Black Control is so bad. I was really scared to play this deck, actually, because there's been a minor resurgence of Mono Black Control, like, in the challenges and everything. But the week prior to this one, I really didn't see much popping up, so I decided to go for it. And thankfully, I did not run into any. I consider, while you can sort of come back from Burn, I usually treat Mono Black Control as like an auto loss. It's so hard to beat that deck with this one, just because they have so many ways to kill your dudes. And not only, and unlike, you know, say, Dimir, it's not just like one-time kill spells. They're running Pestilence, they're running Kumbaj Witches, things like that. That will just wipe your board out. They can cast Crypt Rats, put Cartouche of Ambition on it, and activate it for one, you know, just once a turn, and just your board is gone. But they still have theirs. It's so difficult to deal with it. that I usually just treat it as a loss, like right out of the gate. Boros can be kind of 50-50. It depends. Usually I find decks like Is It Blitz and Inside Out combo, they're going to combo off faster than you, so they become really difficult to deal with. And that's why it becomes more important to hit your Well-Wishers. It becomes more important to hit your Luminescent Rains and your Moment's Peace out of your sideboard, so you can deal with them before they can really go off and get there. Teachings is again kind of hit and miss. I think it just depends how quickly you get out your board before they can say like Evan Carr's Justice you. Affinity is, again, it's one of those 50-50 matchups. It really usually ends up coming down to, do they have the Atog Fling, or do you have the Well-Wisher and Timberwatch Elf? If you have the Well-Wisher, you can probably just get there, just because you'll get more life than they ever could. Try to whittle down from you with a flung Atog. And if you get Timberwatch Elf, then you can just block all of their dudes, you can attack in and not having to worry about something dying, things like that. So, really, that's pretty much about what I've got to say here. There's really some interesting matches to come. So, yep, this is the list that I was playing. Obviously, you'll see different ones pop up. I fully expect the Lead the Stampede list to show up at some point, but I don't think it'll 100% replace this list. Kind of like how Mono Blue Delver is still a thing, even though Blue Red Delver has mostly taken its place. I still think they'll coexist with each other at the same time. So that's this deck tech, and I hope you guys enjoy it. I hope you enjoy the rest of the videos as well.